Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's commentary. What the European Union has done with SAFE is not a routine adjustment of defense policy, nor is it a temporary response to a single crisis. It represents a rupture in strategic reality, a fundamental shift in how power is organized, produced, and projected. A €150 billion defense instrument does far more than fund factories or replenish stockpiles. It reorganizes incentives, rewires industrial logic, and in doing so quietly reprograms power itself. SAFE was initially presented as a corrective mechanism, a way to repair Europe's fragmented defense industry, accelerate joint procurement, and reduce short-term wartime dependency. That framing no longer holds. The moment Japan, South Korea, Europe, and Canada moved toward participation, SAFE ceased to be an internal European tool and became a global gravitational center for arms production. At that point, it transformed into a strategic marketplace where industrial capacity and geopolitical influence converge inside Europe itself, marking a critical inflection point in the global security landscape. Europe is no longer acting simply as a region preparing to defend itself. It is repositioning itself as a central node in the global military supply chain, openly competing with the United States and China in industrial scale, technological integration, and long-term production capacity. This transition is historic and deeply consequential. Arms programs of this magnitude do not exist in isolation. They reshape alliance behavior, distort threat perception, and force rival powers to plan not for short-term crises, but for decades of sustained confrontation. SAFE sends a clear signal that Europe is not preparing for a war to end, but for a world in which war may persist. This is why the true escalation is not financial, but structural. Once foreign powers are permitted to build, co-produce, and embed military technology within Europe, SAFE crosses that mobilization. Europe has opened a door that may not be easily closed, and the echo of that decision is already global. The rapid entry of Japan, South Korea, Türkiye, and Canada into SAFE is not an act of solidarity, a calculated strategic move. None of these states is seeking symbolic participation. They are pursuing embedded industrial presence because manufacturing inside Europe allows them to shape Europe's future security choices before those choices are ever publicly debated. Influence in modern power politics flows not only through diplomacy, but through production lines, supply chains, and technological integration. Japan's approach is the most quietly radical. Tokyo understands that dependence on the American security umbrella comes with political constraints, export limitations, and strategic predictability. SAFE offers access to European demand without Washington's regulatory gravity. By anchoring production in Europe, Japan does not abandon the United States. It hedges against it. This is rearmament through diversification, executed without confrontation or headlines. South Korea's strategy is more direct. Seoul has already demonstrated its ability to supply Europe with fast, reliable, and politically convenient systems, and SAFE transforms that temporary success into permanent presence. Factories inside Europe mean supply chains protected from maritime disruption, sanctions, shocks. The continent ceases to be merely a stage on which strategy unfolds. It becomes the infrastructure through which strategy is executed. History offers a consistent warning. When arms manufacturing centralizes while geopolitical trust erodes, deterrence gives way to acceleration. Production demands justification, capacity demands use, and political restraint slowly dissolves under the pressure of industrial momentum. SAFE crosses that threshold, and what Brussels continues to describe as an regional escalation on the Korean peninsula. For South Korea, SAFE is not expansion, but industrial forward basing. Tours participation is the most politically charged, excluded, and sanctioned at different moments by both NATO and the European Union. Ankara has adapted to a world in which influence no longer flows solely through formal alliances. It flows through drones, armored vehicles, sensors, software, and production capacity. SAFE offers dual return to Europe, not as a supplicant, but as a supplier, a partner by necessity rather than trust. Canada's involvement reveals a quieter anxiety shared by many middle powers inside NATO. Industrial marginalization as long-term war economy while subtly reducing dependence on American supply chains. Taken together, these states are not simply joining Europe's defense project, they are embedding themselves inside it. SAFE is not absorbing partners, but foreign strategic agendas. And once embedded, those agendas do not withdraw quietly. Europe continues to describe SAFE as a resilience initiative. But that language is misleading. Resilience suggests recovery and stability, while what SAFE is constructing resembles infrastructure for sustained conflict. A 150 billion euros program does not exist merely to close short-term gaps. It exists to reshape behavior, lock in production cycles, and normalize permanent militarization. For decades, Europe outsourced strategic responsibility. NATO, the United States, supplied industrial scale, and crises supplied urgency. SAFE dismantles, modeled by pre-manufacturing readiness and cross-border procurement, are being fused into a system designed to operate continuously, whether war is active or merely anticipated. This is the anatomy of a war economy, and once such an economy exists, it begins to shape policy rather than respond to it. Budgets follow factories, strategy follows contracts, and restraint becomes increasingly abstract. Europe is recreating, almost unintentionally, the very military-industrial structure it long criticized. In Washington, the difference, however, is critical. The United States built its system with unified command, centralized doctrine, and global reach. Europe is building one amid fragmentation, and with that combination is inherently unstable. SAFE is not a temporary response to Ukraine. Its timelines extend far beyond the battlefield. Multi-year contracts, joint production, technology transfers, and infrastructure investments lock Europe into decades of armament, creating a self-reinforcing logic in which capacity demands use and use demands justification. Europe is not merely reacting to a dangerous world, it is restructuring itself to permanently inhabit one. In seeking independence from American protection, it is binding itself to a militarized economic path that reduces political flexibility. SAFE may strengthen Europe's defenses, But it does so by hard-coding conflict into Europe's future. That is not resilience, it is transformation, and it carries costs Europe has not yet fully counted. SAFE has triggered something rare in global politics: simultaneous anxiety among all three major power centers. For the United States, SAFE is not a friendly supplement to NATO, but a structural challenge. Because the fear in Washington is not European rearmament itself, but rearmament outside the American industrial ecosystem. NATO has always been as much an economic architecture as a military one, binding procurement standards, logistics, and technology to U.S. dominance. SAFE threatens to loosen that grip. Russia interprets SAFE with colder clarity. Moscow does not see a response to Ukraine, but preparation for long-duration confrontation. China's concern is quieter, but deeper. SAFE collapses geographic separation by fusing the Atlantic, Indo-Pacific into a single competitive system. Once Japanese and South Korean defense industries embed inside Europe. Europe producing more internally and with trusted partners weakens Beijing's economic leverage and accelerates decoupling through industrial redundancy rather than ideology. From Washington to Moscow to Beijing, the conclusion converges. SAFE is not stabilizing Europe. It is reprogramming the global security environment. Europe believes it is gaining autonomy, but the great powers see a continent transforming itself into the central arena of military-industrial competition. Once capacity becomes the language of power, restraint ceases to be the dominant grammar. SAFE does not merely respond to insecurity, it produces it. Once military production is scaled, embedded, and normalized, strategy no longer begins in foreign ministries, but in factories. This is the most dangerous transformation of all. Europe is no longer building a shield, it is building a beacon. And beacons